A misty morning blanketed the forests of Minnesota, the old pine trees swaying gently under the chill of spring winds. Dew clung to the tips of the grass, glistening like tiny glass beads. In the distance, the hoot of an owl echoed, blending with the soft snap of dry twigs under clawed paws. In the middle of that still, quiet forest, a lone bobcat cub crept shakily out of a hollow log, its fur matted with mud, tiny greenish-blue eyes wide with terror. Its mother hadn't returned for 2 days. No familiar scent, no soft, comforting growl, only the ache of an empty belly and a rising wall of fear. Not far away, a pack of forest wolves, their amber eyes burning like fire, had already locked onto this easy prey. Silently they advanced, steps light as drifting wind, circling in a tightening crescent, each wolf taking its place with deadly precision. The bobcat cub let out a weak, high-pitched hiss, its tiny paws backing desperately against the tree base, claws feebly raised in hopeless defense. And then, from a nearby thicket, a massive dark figure emerged, thick-furred, battle-scarred, its body carrying the weight of old wounds. Ghostclaw, the old rogue bobcat. The wind itself seemed to hesitate. The wolves froze mid-step. The cub held its breath, and the forest fell utterly still, waiting for the strange, impossible moment about to unfold. In the dense forest carpeted with fallen red leaves, as dusk crept between the tall trees, a circle of gray wolves closed in. At its center, a tiny bobcat cub trembled, its scruffy fur bristling with fear, wide round eyes shimmering with tears. Its breaths came in quick gasps, heart pounding wildly, tiny claws scratching helplessly at the dry, leafy ground, as it backed away until its spine pressed against a fallen log. Low growls rumbled from the wolf pack, their gleaming fangs flashing under the fading sunset, waiting for the final, inevitable moment to end this game. But then, from the edge of the shadows, a different sound emerged. Not a howl, not a snarl. It was a rasping hiss, rough and dry, carrying the weight of old age but sharp and heavy as steel. Ghostclaw stepped forward, his silver-gray fur marred with old scars, amber eyes glowing coldly. He didn't rush in, he didn't roar. He simply hissed, softly, but steadily, moving step by step, slow yet unshakable, directly into the heart of the wolf circle. The wolves hesitated, ears pricked, noses sniffing sharply, front paws stiffened. They caught his scent, not that of a young, easy-to-fell bobcat, nor of a panicked creature ready to flee. This was Ghostclaw, the survivor of countless battles, the old bobcat driven from his clan yet still standing strong in the forest, a living legend whispered about on long, dark nights. One young wolf, impatient and reckless, suddenly lunged forward, jaws wide, fangs glinting. In that split second, Ghostclaw pivoted, delivering a precise swipe of his paw. It wasn't a killing blow, just a calculated strike, sharp enough to slash across the wolf's muzzle, leaving a thin red line in its fur. The wolf pack froze. There was no barking, no follow-up attack. One by one, they began to retreat, not in panic, not in chaos, but in a slow, deliberate withdrawal, eyes still locked on Ghostclaw. They understood. Something greater had stepped into the circle. A force not measured by sheer strength, but by experience, by the stories passed down through the rustling leaves of many seasons. When at last the circle dissolved, Ghostclaw turned his head toward the tiny Lin Mu Khan still trembling, barely able to stay upright. He didn't hiss again. He simply approached, shoulders heavy with scars, moving quietly under the fading amber light. A faint breeze swept through, carrying the scent of young grass, damp earth, and the heavy breath of two beings who had just skirted the edge of life and death. And there, in the hushed stillness of the forest, a new story began, not marked by roars or snarls, but by the profound silence between two survivors. The tiny bobcat cub trembled, its small legs wobbling in the cold mud as it looked up at Ghostclaw, the once feared elder bobcat, the lone wanderer, the one whose name carried weight across the forest. The cub's amber-yellow eyes glistened with terror, but strangely, It didn't run. It didn't hide. It simply stood there, shivering in waves, its soaked fur matted by the night mist, its thin tail curled tightly against its belly. Ghostclaw lowered his head, stepping forward slowly. His breath billowed out in white puffs into the crisp air. A soft hiss escaped from his throat, not to threaten, but as if testing, as if awakening some primal rhythm. The cub flinched, stepping back half a pace, but then paused, as Ghostclaw gently touched his wet nose to the cub's neck, inhaling deeply, checking its breath, its warmth, its fragile signs of life. The cub let out a faint whimper then. Suddenly, perhaps unable to withstand the biting cold, it flung itself forward, burrowing into the thick ruff of Ghostclaw's chest, seeking any scrap of warmth. Ghostclaw stood still, his scarred shoulders twitching slightly. He wasn't used to this. How long had it been since anyone came close? Since anyone dared touch him? Since anyone leaned into his breath for survival? Yet this tiny bobcat cub had no other choice, and Ghostclaw, surprisingly, didn't push it away. Above them, tall pine branches swayed gently, the wind whispering through, carrying the sharp scent of the forced-off damp leaves, old earth, and the lingering trails of the lone drifter. Ghostclaw slowly closed his eyes. He could hear the cub's little heart pounding rapidly, hear the weak, uneven breaths, feel the shivering pressed against his fur. One breath, two, three, then Ghostclaw opened his eyes and let out a low, rumbling hiss. It wasn't a warning. It was as if he were saying, "Stay alive, little one." That night, they didn't wander far. Ghostclaw settled down beside a fallen log, curling his body to shield the cub from the wind. The small bobcat nestled close to his belly, burying its face deep into his thick coat. Ghostclaw's eyes stayed half open through the darkness, his ears twitching now and then, tuned to the sounds of the forest, the distant hoot of an owl, the faint chittering of squirrels high in the trees, the soft rustle of falling leaves. But no howls, no hunting cries. At least, not tonight. For the first time in many seasons, Ghostclaw, the solitary legend of the woods, allowed another heartbeat to settle beside his own. And under the cold, star-flecked sky, surrounded by the hush of the ancient trees, two strangers, one scarred by time, one just learning the cruel edges of survival, breathed together, silently forging a bond neither of them yet understood. As the pale morning light filtered through the treetops, Ghostclaw slowly rose, his dark gray coat heavy with dew, exhaling a faint chill into the air. He lowered his head and gently licked the tip of the cub's ear, a quiet signal. The tiny bobcat cub, eyes half-lidded with sleep, shivered and stirred, then wobbled onto its still weak little legs, determined to rise. Ghostclaw was the first to step out from the thicket, each step deliberate and steady. He didn't rush, didn't push the pace, as if fully aware that the tiny life behind him needed time to keep up. The cub toddled after, slipping on the soggy mud, tumbling forward a few times, its small paws covered in dirt. And every time it fell, Ghostclaw stopped, turned his scarred head back, and waited, not impatiently, not with frustration, but with the quiet patience of one who knew the forest's hard lessons couldn't be hurried. The dawn sunlight poured across the wet grass, casting shimmering beams through the gaps in the bushes. Ghostclaw didn't lead the cub to a hidden den, didn't veer toward the safer paths, didn't tuck them away under cover. Instead, he guided the cub directly into the open, where the whole forest could see, where danger still lingered in every shadow. Maybe, for Ghostclaw, this wasn't just about survival, it was a silent declaration. He wasn't afraid, and from now on the little cub would learn to walk unafraid too. The cub stumbled along, its tiny tail flicking for balance. Its sharp little ears twitched upright, catching every sound, the whisper of wind, the drip of water from branches, the flutter of distant wings. Each sound made the cub startle, hesitate, but each time, it glanced at Ghostclaw ahead, and, drawing from some new and fragile trust, took another step. Every so often, Ghostclaw paused not just to wait, but to sniff the air, to listen to the breathing rhythm of the woods. The scents of last night still floated faintly, the musky trace of wolves, the sharp tang of fox, the restless pulse of nocturnal hunters. But for now, They had pulled back. Ghostclaw let out a low hiss, nudged his head, showing the cub how to scramble onto a low rock, teaching it to leap across a shallow, water-filled gap. The cub tried once, missed. Tried again and landed. A faint rumble escaped Ghostclaw's throat, something almost like a chuckle, almost like silent praise. The sun rose higher, gilding the path where two shapes, one large, one small, strode side by side through the forest. Birds paused their songs. Deer lifted their heads mid-chew. Unseen eyes from within the underbrush watched quietly. No one interfered. No one blocked their way. Ghostclaw and the cub walked as if the whole forest parted before them, witnessing something rare. Two strangers, two lives once unconnected, now walking in rhythm, the strong refusing to abandon the weak learning to keep pace with the strong. And on that path, beneath beams of sunlight breaking through the branches, there was no sound but the soft tread of paws blending into the pulse of the woods, where a story began to write. Itself a story no creature had dared tell before. The rumor spread swiftly through the forest, not through words, not through sound, but through footprints, through scents, through the subtle shifts only wild creatures could sense. A deer passed along a narrow trail, paused, and lowered its nose to sniff a large paw print pressed into the soft earth right beside it, a much smaller, lighter print. On a hillside above, a red fox crouched low, its ears pricked, eyes narrowing as it watched the two bobcats glide silently below, one large, one small, moving side by side. Up in the trees, an owl swiveled its head, letting out a quiet hoot, its yellow eyes following the pair crossing the forest's edge under the pale moonlight. Ghostclaw was not just leading, he was teaching. In front of an old tree, he hissed softly, lifted a paw, and scraped sharp lines into the bark-marking territory, showing the little cub how to leave signs for others. We were here. The cub hesitated at first, then mimicked him, scratching small, shallow marks, not deep, not yet confident, but enough to show it was learning. When they reached a narrow stone gap filled with rainwater, Ghostclaw leapt across gracefully, without looking back. But on the other side, he stopped and waited. The little cub stood trembling before the gap, paws shifting nervously, testing. It tried a leap, missed, slipped into the cold puddle with a splash. Shaking, it clambered up, lifting its eyes to meet Ghostclaw's steady gaze. No growl, no hiss, just silence, just patience. On its second try, the cub crouched back, gathered itself, leapt and made it. Ghostclaw let out a low, approving rumble, turned, and continued walking. The cub shook itself off, its wet fur sticking up awkwardly. But in its eyes now glimmered something new. A flicker of confidence, a faint spark pushing away the shadows of fear. At the small forest stream, where many creatures gathered to drink, Ghostclaw halted, sniffed the air, scanned carefully before stepping down to the water's edge. The cub, cautious, followed slowly, timidly lapping at the water, eyes darting nervously. Ghostclaw showed it how to read the world through scent, the familiar trail of deer, the sharp tang of fox, the signs of animals they could share space with, and the unfamiliar sense, the smell of danger, the things they must avoid. Gradually, the tracks left behind by Ghostclaw and his little companion became more than just strange puzzles for the other creatures. They became a story spreading across the forest. The deer flicked their ears, alert and whispering through glances. The foxes crept back into the underbrush, watching silently. The owls circled higher, more carefully. The entire forest seemed to know that something was happening. A lone old bobcat, once a shadow drifting alone, now walking beside a small cub, passing on all the lessons of survival. As night settled in, Ghostclaw and the cub curled beneath a giant tree, their fur puffed up against the cold. The little cub pressed close to his side, burrowing into a warmth that was not its mother's but still brought a strange, unexpected sense of safety. Ghostclaw closed his eyes, his scarred ears still twitching, tuned to every rustle, every faint crackle in the dark. And for the first time in many frightened nights, The little cub closed its eyes too, its breath soft and steady, drifting into a deep sleep carrying in its small chest a rare, precious fragment of peace. That night, a crescent moon hung high, casting silver light across the ground, turning the Okefenokee forest into a maze of shadows and gleaming patches. Ghostclaw was leading the bobcat cub across a low meadow, where ancient cypress trees stretched silently toward the sky. But then he stopped. A breeze carried an unfamiliar predator scent, the scent of wolves. The cub sensed it too. It pressed tightly against Ghostclaw's legs, wide eyes glimmering with fear. In the dark, Ghostclaw's scarred ears rotated sharply, catching faint sounds as thin as threads. The crackle of paws on dry leaves, the rasping of shallow breaths, the low growls circling closer. From all directions, yellow eyes flickered into view, silent, patient. The wolf pack had returned this time larger, stronger. They didn't lunge right away. They crept in slowly, step by step, tightening the ring, leaving only a small patch of space where Ghostclaw and the cub stood. But Ghostclaw didn't retreat. He shifted his body, placing himself squarely between the cub and the advancing threat, lowering his shoulders, and let out a deep, rumbling hiss, not loud, but heavy with warning. The lead wolf, a massive beast with a scar slashed across its face, stepped forward. It bared its teeth, circling cautiously, looking for an opening. Ghostclaw didn't flinch. The cub, trembling behind him, kept its tiny ears straining forward, trying to follow every movement. Suddenly, one wolf broke rank and lunged, snarling. Ghostclaw spun, his claws flashing. It wasn't a killing blow, just a precise, powerful swipe that struck the wolf across the muzzle, sending it sprawling with a yelp of pain. For a heartbeat, the air froze. The wolves halted, their glowing eyes flickering with calculation, hesitation. They understood now. This was no fragile prey, no easy target they could corner and crush. Ghostclaw didn't advance, didn't provoke. He just stood, a weathered, scar-marked wall of muscle and bone, his breath heaving steadily, amber eyes burning through the night. A short howl rose a command. The lead wolf turned away, and one by one, the others began to back off. Not in panic, not in a frantic scramble, but with ordered, deliberate steps, fading back into the shadows, leaving behind only the quiet night and the heavy breathing of the two bobcats. Ghostclaw stayed motionless long after the last wolf vanished. His muscles were taut, his shoulders high, each breath labored, but he did not collapse. Slowly, the cub peeked out from its hiding place and crept forward, rubbing its small head gently against Ghostclaw's leg. Ghostclaw bent down, gave a soft, tired lick to the cub's ear, a small, quiet gesture, as if to say, "We're still here." Above them, the wind stirred the treetops again, carrying the smell of damp grass, wet earth, and living things, the smell of life. Ghostclaw turned, his steps slow, heavier now, but steady. He led the cub onward, deeper into the forest. The long night was far from over, but Ghostclaw had proven something not just to the wolves, but to the entire forest, and perhaps most of all to himself. There are battles you don't have to win. You just have to stand your ground. Dawn crept through the old pine canopy, casting a pale golden light across the Okefenokee forest. Ghostclaw stood silently, his gray fur heavy with dew, his shoulders hunched, each step weighted from the long night. The fresh battle wound on his shoulder had crusted with dry blood, yet his amber eyes remained sharp, fixed forward where the bobcat cub trudged behind him, tired, but refusing to give up. Not far ahead, a shape emerged, not a whole group, just a single other bobcat, its fur sleek and glossy, the supple body of youth. It stood atop a stone outcrop, ears flicking, eyes following Ghostclaw. Among solitary creatures, the appearance of another was never a coincidence. Ghostclaw came to a halt. He didn't growl, didn't hiss. He simply lowered himself slightly, nudging the cub closer to his side. Both remained still, listening, waiting. The young bobcat didn't attack. It cautiously took a few steps forward, its gaze lingering on the fresh claw marks along Ghostclaw's flank, on the heavy breathing of the cub at his feet. In that moment, within the silence of the forest, everything seemed to pause. The younger bobcat didn't leap, didn't snarl over territory. It merely stood at a distance, sniffing the air, evaluating. Ghostclaw dipped his head slightly, not showing threat, not driving the other away, not asking for companionship, simply offering a quiet acknowledgement. I'm passing through. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to protect this little one. After a long, slow beat, the younger bobcat lifted its paw, stepped back, and turned away. No challenge, no invitation. Just letting them be. Ghostclaw let out a long, steady breath, then bent his head to gently lick the tip of the cub's ear, as if to say, "It's all right now." High above, the wind rustled softly through the branches, carrying the scent of fresh grass, damp earth, the delicate rustle of leaves. In the world of solitary creatures, sometimes recognition didn't come with loud calls or affectionate touches. Sometimes, it existed only in a fleeting moment, when both sides understood, we are not enemies. Ghostclaw turned and began walking again, his large, heavy paws pressing into the soft earth. The cub hurried to keep pace, its tiny feet leaving small prints alongside the larger ones. Behind them, only the quiet forest remained the traces of a brief, wordless encounter already fading into the morning mist. Evening settled over the Okefenokee forest, the last rays of sunlight stretching like thin golden threads across the canopy. Ghostclaw stood atop a jutting stone, his amber eyes gazing down into the hollow below, where the young bobcat, now stronger, swifter, was practicing pouncing on a small weasel darting through the underbrush. With every failed leap, every misstep, the cub would glance up at Ghostclaw, as if seeking a sign of encouragement. But Ghostclaw remained still, his sharp eyes observing, his ears flicking occasionally, never interfering, never helping, just quietly watching. In the world of bobcats, there was no true concept of a pack. Each one hunted alone, lived alone, survived alone. Yet Ghostclaw knew that some connections didn't need social structures to exist, like the silent bond between him and this cub. He didn't need to walk with other bobcats, didn't need to join any group. All he needed was to see that the small life he had once saved was now standing tall, on its own four paws. As the sun dipped lower, painting the trees a deep, burning red, the young bobcat clambered excitedly up the rock ledge, tail flicking, eyes alight. It had just successfully caught its first prey. Ghostclaw bent his massive head, licking the cub's forehead gently, a slow, deliberate gesture, embedding silent pride into that touch. The cub chirped softly, rubbing against his leg, then bounded down, eager to stash away its prize. Ghostclaw remained on the ledge for a long time, eyes half closed as he watched the sky shift from crimson to violet. Inside, he felt no loneliness. He had long since grown used to solitude. But now, he was no longer alone. He didn't need a pack, didn't need a clan. It was enough to know, out there, somewhere close, was a small life he had pulled back from the edge of death, a life now learning how to write its own story. When night fell, Ghostclaw did not curl up beside the young bobcat. Instead, he settled a short distance away, beneath the sprawling roots of an ancient tree, ears tuned to the whispers of the wind, the rustle of leaves, the nighttime stirrings of forest creatures. The young bobcat, tucked up in a ball nearby, occasionally lifted its head, ears twitching, then, reassured, nestled back into its tail and drifted off to sleep. Perhaps Ghostclaw would never belong to any group, would never be part of a collective. But he had left his mark not on the earth, but within the heart of one small bobcat. And for a creature of the wild like Ghostclaw, that was enough. Spring dawn gently spread across the Okefenokee forest, light dripping softly through dew-laden leaves. Ghostclaw walked slowly along a familiar path, not needing to glance back, but he knew. At just the right distance behind him, the young bobcat followed, step by step, paw by paw, a youthful shadow trailing the scar-marked figure ahead. All through the long winter, Ghostclaw had taught it everything: how to mark territory, how to read the scent on the wind, how to tell the difference between a snapping branch and the sound of a predator's footfall. He had taught it how to leap over bog traps, how to stalk from within the grass, how to retreat when the odds were unwinnable. But more than that, he had taught it the lesson no claw or tooth could pass on: the lesson of endurance, of resilience, of the price behind every breath drawn in a ruthless wild. And then one day, Ghostclaw stopped at the edge of the forest, where young maple saplings grew between the roots of ancient cypress trees. He turned his head, looking at the young bobcat, no longer so small, its fur thick, muscles lean and strong, its amber eyes lit with newfound confidence. The bobcat stepped forward, nudged its head against Ghostclaw's leg, letting out a soft, chirping hiss. Ghostclaw bent down, gently licked the top of its head one final time, then turned away, walking off slowly, without looking back. There were no farewells, no promises. Among bobcats, separation was inevitable. The young one would claim its own territory, live its own life. Ghostclaw would continue his solitary path, as he had always done, for as long as memory reached. Day by day, Ghostclaw's figure was seen less and less along the streams, less often on the sunlit stones. But the legend of him did not fade. In the night cries echoing over the hills, in the deep paw prints pressed into old mud, the stories spread. About an old bobcat who had once saved an orphaned cub, taught it how to survive, and then quietly slipped back into the shadowed forest. Poachers, wolf packs, and even other night predators learned to avoid the region once marked by Ghostclaw, not because he was still there, but because the idea of him remained. An invisible respect, as though the forest itself had carved his name into every tree, every stone, every gust of wind. And the young bobcat, now fully grown, continued to leave its own marks alongside the old ones, sometimes stepping directly into the same prints, sometimes forging a separate trail. It became part of the forest, carrying strength, wisdom, and a flicker of the spirit of the one who had once saved its life. Deep in the heart of Okefenokee, when the full moon hung high, some said you could still hear a raspy, low hiss echoing across the trees. No one knew whether it was truly Ghostclaw or merely the echo of an old tale. But to the forest, it didn't matter, because true legacy isn't measured by how long a life lasts, but by the mark it leaves on the lives of others. And Ghostclaw, the lone wanderer, the one marked by time, the one who opened his heart for a fragile little cub, left behind a legacy even the deepest forest would never erase.